Good afternoon, Senate Institutions. It's Thursday, March 14th. We have with us today Nicholas Kramer, budget analyst for Department of Finance and Management, Sean Brown, Chief of Operations, Agency of Administration. We're going to spend some time going over a budget plan that everybody prepared for us, and something we talked about the other day. So, Mr. Kramer, thank you. Thank you for coming.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks, committee, for having me. Nice to be with you. So my understanding based on the conversation on Tuesday was we talked about a lot of things, but one thing that came up was this idea of long-term capital planning, and how we are looking at capital needs over the long term. So the document that I've passed along to Linda, which I'm given to understand was sent to committee members, has not been printed only because it's 123 pages. So we could all
Thank you.
flex our muscles there. And the reason it's 123 pages is because it's substantially just a PDF version of the full biennial capital booklet that would have been delivered to this committee at the beginning of the last session. So if anybody has that still handy.
Is that this?
Yep,
Yeah.
yeah, so any folks that have that, that's all I'm gonna be referring to as that capital booklet. Seven or some chance, but it's also online. It lives on the Department of Finance and Management website. It's something you can go from there. And what I'll do as folks, I pull that up or out, is just start off with a high level overview and maybe reminder of how the governor's recommended capital bill development process works and kind of what our time frame is, because I think that plays into this. So as this committee recalls, well, this has come up a number of times. The annual bonded authority is set by the Capital Debt Affordability Advisory Committee, or CDAC. And they meet generally in the early fall annually to assess, or in some cases reassess, the acceptable and advisable prudent level of debt that the state can take on. And they go through a process that looks pretty high level of scrutiny at a number of metrics and Vermont's over economic pictures, and they come up with a recommendation. And they submit a letter to the General Assembly and to the governor. It's usually sometime towards the end of October, I think, is the statutory deadline. And so based on that information, we are then, the Agency of Administration has an overall bonded dollar target that we know we can borrow up to this amount. And we put out capital bill instructions to all agencies. There are, as this committee knows, sort of the frequent flyer agencies that are represented in the capital bill that comprise the sections. Not every single entity in the state of Vermont has capital assets, but we put out broadly the instructions, soliciting requests from departments who have a period of time to get back to us with those requests. And within those instructions generally are included some language about the format of what they submit. There's basically, we ask them, well, how much money do you want, and what's the description of the project? And then a big piece of that is, how does this fit into the agency or entity, if it's a department, a free floating department? How does this fit into your long-term capital asset plan? So every entity should have a sense over time how our assets depreciating, what's kind of coming up on the horizon, what are the major projects, for obvious reasons. And I think that's the crux of the question here, is how are we piecing the capital bill together? So in the booklet, and I see Senator Harrison's found it at the end, that's the consolidation. The booklet itself that we delivered last year is comprised of generally sections. So each section of the bill is mirrored in the booklet, and there's extensive detail on each proposed appropriation. There's usually a couple paragraphs of narrative. We want to do X, and here's Y, and here are the important needs, and here's how we're going to do it at the time frame and what it costs. And so generally, as part of those, each section includes the snippet At the very end, there are charts that situate the current capital bill appropriation within a larger planning framework. And so obviously or maybe not obviously, but not all capital projects are created equal. There are some very quick, small scope things that can be done in a single fiscal year. There are longer term projects that take multiple fiscal years to complete. And in the case particularly of the latter, it's really important for us to know, okay, if we are starting a big project and it's gonna take $3 million this year, what's coming down the pipe, right? Because that all has to be balanced in the decision making of the limited funds available to us. So I'm looking now at page, I think, trying to choose one that's got a good multi-year plan component. I think the women's correctional facility is actually a really good example. Just trying to find which page it's on. It would be in the end where Senator Harrison's looking, but it's in section 3. Also on page. See, I think it's on page 36. 36, yeah. I think
Let's
so.
just send an email, can you find that email?
So,
Linda's gonna.
so mine's 76, but is that the first page of the?
This is
Pass it on there.
The entire 10-year plan, file, so what I'm pointing to is within the detailed section.
Right, but wouldn't it be over here too? Oh, there,
So there's.
Yeah, I think women.
One, I guess, one kind of condensation, but you're looking at essentially the same.
it should be the same numbers, right?
Minus the narrative, yeah, it is the same. So, and I was just hoping to highlight, so like on page 36, there's 15 in the governor's recommend, we were recommending setting aside 15.5 million. There's the text that outlines the project. The phase that we're in, the current phase includes site selection and ongoing design work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the next page, on page 37, there is this chart excerpt, which is, yes, an excerpt from the larger 10-year plan in the back. And so it shows, in fact, not only the current budget year and capital bill cycle request, these figures, for anybody that's confused looking on page 37, are given in thousands. So 500 is actually 500,000, 1,000 is actually a million, et cetera. So it shows the appropriations to date, if there are any leading up to this project, any planning, design work that's already been completed, schematic design, et cetera. The current amount being requested, and then the requirements of future fiscal years, so FY20, in this case, FY26, FY27, and FY28 through 33 are aggregated. And then those amounts are further broken out by stage, kind of vertically as well.
So 6 years are aggregated,
28.
right? 28, 29.
So this, if you think about this as a 10-year, if you sort of count the bookend years, this is really an 11-year snapshot starting before the capital cycle before. And then, yeah, those last fiscal years, and I think the reason for that aggregation, each department could easily go into their internal documents and disaggregate, but it's far out, as we know. As this committee knows better than most, things change a lot. And the farther out from the present you get, your projections are just inherently uncertain.
Yeah. I hear that. I'll have comments, just because when you look at the aggregated in the back, do you guys have that?
Yeah, I have it.
It's good that this exists. It just, really, I would say like 27, 28 seem to be, actually 26. If you look at the subtotals, the amounts go way down in 28, 29, and then, there may be a fit of what the others are. So it's just, we know that's not gonna happen.
So I should clarify that what's provided there is not necessarily. What we don't have is a complete build out of each capital bill from now 10 years into the future.
Right.
This is sort of what you're commenting on, Senator, is the half-life of the current projects and what it takes to
Yeah.
complete. But presumably there will be things not on the radar that pop up that we have to
Exactly.
include. So, yeah, no, it's not meant in any way to be a comprehensive planning document moving
Right.
forward, but more to inform future capital bills. And Sean can confirm, we do go back and look at prior year, especially for some of these projects that have been a long time in the works, the Williston Barracks, for instance, or Battle Monument is something we looked at this year. You know, we go back and look and say sort of what were the projections at this point, what's changed in terms of what we now know.
Oh, yeah, and it's good to have, and there are some areas like the clean water, you know, that's going to be ongoing, presuming that the federal funding is ongoing. And that has reasonable, to me, just looking at this now, it increases in the future. So that's helpful, and it makes sense to do it as a total, obviously you don't know the projects, but you know that things are gonna need to be built and rebuilt, and you know that, you won't have enough.
Right.
Whatever it is. So this is helpful. I guess. I have just a couple questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Where's the NRV or the NRV, the BC, oh, VHCB, cause that's the one where it's
What page is that?
that's page 80 in this.
Oh,
So it's
Very-
the second to the last page. Isn't that the one that's supposed to be funded at a certain level and we always do the notwithstanding?
VHCB, short answer is no, this appropriation that you're looking at is not that.
Okay,
VHCB's funding is statutorily codified elsewhere. That's an issue that shows up in the operating budget. Yeah.
so is this part of that?
I don't believe, no, this is when, at least, I mean, and I'm not completely sure, well, I don't wanna assume what you're referencing, but the
Yes, well, the
conversations
line,
about
it's line
the-
157.
Yeah, but in terms of the conversations about like fully fund VHCB or the
Yeah.
statutory, that's not, this is, I think, just convention, state norm has been to appropriate a certain amount in the capital bill for VHCB for a number of years.
Right,
And so this is in addition to whatever the discussion is that's happening regarding their statutory.
so you could extend that number rather than have it be 0 after 26.
That's, you certainly could, yeah, I mean, again, I don't think this document is so much meant to be a prescriptive like roadmap to future.
Right.
Or like a sense of ongoing pressures, which depending on the will of the governing body, that could, if that's a stable, long-term commitment, then people.
Does your department use this, the projections? Do you project out future,
In what sense you?
just making long-term
Yeah,
projections?
like right now, one of the, we've been.
Just
talking
just like
about-
running scenarios.
Yeah, like we've been talking a lot about like the great project to highlight the women's facility. We know our bonding capacity has been decreasing every cycle that CDAC makes a recommendation. We anticipate it will reduce next year. As you'll see, we've got some money set aside, we've spent some money, but that the longer term need there could easily consume the bulk of two capital bill cycles to bring unless there's a separate appropriation in the big bill, if it's all in the capital bill. Other than, our major maintenance and our clean water obligations to the federal government and some of the other things we
Mhm.
regularly, as you just brought up some of that.
Yeah.
The community grants we do every year, tend to be at the same level. They've got some increases. But like, we know that we have this huge expense coming up of the women's facility.
Right,
And that's, it's been in our thinking about, like, that's why we set some money aside last year. Because it just could impact our ability to meet needs in other areas of state government. And what are some of the options and how we, looking at that 10-year, and they're gonna keep updating that as we get into the project more, we get more refined estimates and we get the number of beds in each component of that facility. And understand the location and the location, what that location is gonna need in terms of sewer and water, electrical. And so we'll get better cost estimates down the road. And then as we know now, we can project what we know today, but the cost of it gone
Oh, sure.
eventually through the roof, and that impacts it as well too, what we can do.
I think so. The Women's Correctional Facility, actually, was curious on looking at this now as a great example of how this can be a helpful document in that arena in
Mhm.
terms of planning, but also it has some pretty, in a very dynamic, changing cost environment, has some limitations, right? So that $71.5 million figure. I mean, there's so much still to be ironed out about that facility, so I'm hesitant to quote any specific number. But I think suffice it to say, we've heard different figures more recently that are like 8 figures different from that, right? So significant changes that I think it just highlights the challenge, right,
Right,
of planning a project that could be 6 years out.
right. And it's very helpful to have some numbers
Right, I mean, orders.
there and just to know the year of completion,
Right, at the time.
which
that this
is
was
not
presented, right?
optimistic then either, I don't think.
You know, and then I think the other thing that's kind of superimposed over this is at one time, school construction was embedded in the capital.
Right, and
And then that was taken
that
out.
might be a conversation.
And then I know that's gotten picked
Yeah.
up, that's a current conversation, and that there's this unmet need there in a recent report. And that, as we know, the capital bill construct today, and
Right.
bonding capacity, there's no, I'm not sure where we stay here.
Right, that's another reason to
Yeah.
populate these
Yeah.
future
Yeah.
cells.
Yeah, I just think it's important to remember. Much like you might construct your own budget at home. The closer you are to 2024,
Oh, yeah.
the greater the degree of certainty about those numbers.
Totally.
As you push and push and push. As has been mentioned, Sean mentioned it, the inflation, you have no idea whether that's gonna go up again or down. Interest rates could go up or down. A lot of things, the CDAC recommendation could go up or down.
Oh,
You
yeah.
have really so many little other things playing into it, that if it's $17 million in 2029. How close is that gonna be? I don't know. I don't think
Oh,
anybody
and
does.
I'm
More of
not,
a placeholder than it is.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's just, that's all it is.
but it's still, it's good to do long-term planning, to look at
Well,
trends, lots
it
of things.
can
can
be.
happen.
It can be, but it can be just as harmful sometimes if the information that you have is just a guess.
Well, it depends on what you do with the
Well,
information.
no, I mean, you're gonna have information. Sometimes just the information isn't available. You know, you're out there, you're trying to portray something that that isn't even there yet. So, I mean, it's just, I get what you're saying, but to sit here and look at these projections on 2033 or even 2028 or 29. It's about the best guess scenario is what you can, and if you were to stake your life on it, well, you're probably braver than I.
Okay, well, I'm not gonna stake my life on it, but I do think it's responsible for a government, which is different than a household, to look long-term and
I think they-
just be ready.
Yeah, I think they are.
They're-
Completely agree.
So, and maybe we should just have this conversation every now and then too, and look at this, I mean, you provided it to us, it's good to look at it. And then just be, just understand that we're gonna need revenue, and also understand just how volatile, I mean, the last 5 years, I mean, a pandemic. Is something we never anticipated, and that changed, but it didn't just increase costs, it decreased costs the first couple of years. So
In
there's
some
a
respects.
lot of variability.
Yeah,
So I'm not saying we take this to the bank, but it's just helpful to do long-term planning.
And again, and I would say how this has informed our planning and our thinking as we move forward as well, to your point, Senator. Looking at some of those big ticket items we have on the horizon and also make sure we're meeting our maintenance obligations and
Right.
stuff. You know, we have a couple projects that are important to the state, but we just didn't have the capacity. We didn't see the capacity coming up. And so we have 2 projects that are kind of moving forward outside of the capital bill, but I think there's been testimony, at least on the House side. But, you know, we recently went out to RFP for a 20-year lease on a build to suit, the option to own it at the end of the lease for a juvenile facility, multi-purpose juvenile facility. And then also, the Department of Liquor and Lottery is in dire needs of additional new warehouse space. They're significantly too small to meet their needs, and it's looking like that's gonna go out on a build to lease or lease a building with some enrolled into the lease costs. So instead of paying fee for space for those departments, they'll be paying lease payment out of their operating budget over a set period of time to meet those.
Right.
Make that, that's another way that helps us inform too. So that's something newer that's
Right,
happening.
no, that's good.
Yeah,
And then, I mean, there's all kinds of different ways to help,
Yeah.
like if you don't do something for some reason because it's not ready, then you know where you could pop the money into, because you've already established priorities.
yeah.
Should be updated annually.
Yeah, I mean, if life was as certain as we might like it to be, we wouldn't need a budget adjustment act every year. Because there wouldn't be any variance.
Exactly.
The budget last year, we made it. Next,
No, things have been
That doesn't
completely
happen.
different,
Just do it
right,
every 10 years, you know?
right.
If I might too, I mean, and I hate to, I know I'm Mr. Broken Record on this, but I would just point out too that what we're looking at this point is a 10-year plan based on more or less project cost, right? Not looking specifically at funding sources. And so yes, you could do the crosswalk exercise of, okay, here's what we're projecting just based on these, on what's showing on this spreadsheet, here's what else is out there in the pipeline. As I think Senator Collmore said, or Chair, the CDAC recommendation can go up and down. Another big piece at play, as we've been hitting over and over, is this cash fund, right? Based on the current trajectory, where who knows where the cash fund will be. And so we sincerely hope in the cash fund analysis we originally did, we actually put together a projection that showed, hey, in 10 years, actually, the cash fund would be a $50 million thing.
Yeah.
Commit to a certain path and a certain fiscal discipline about it, and then that helps that's, you look at a document like this, and you look at $71 million for Oakland's correctional facility or whatever it is now, you think, oh yeah, more or less, and I think what Sean was referring to earlier, you look at the amount of the capital bill as it currently exists, that is, I don't want to say non-discretionary, but repetitive and recurring in community building agreements, the $10 million-ish with clean water places. You add up all those things, and you get somewhere on the order of like 16 or 17 million dollars capital bill. That's just like base funding, right? I mean, there's no such thing as base funding and capital, but the kind of the things that you would imagine, barring significant switches in priorities, those are going to be funded. If our capital bill is now at only a little over $50 million total for bonded dollars, and the first 16 million, 20 million of that comes right off the top. Quickly, that amount shrinks pretty fast to what's actually discretionary to fund something like a $71 million project. It could take 3 entire capital bills committed just to that project to even make it 10, right? So those are the kinds of things, the conversation we do have grappling with all these priorities. In an ideal world, we would love to fund every request, of course, that we get, because none of them are bad, right? I think this committee sees that. All right, okay, that's-
I don't like it.
Yeah.
I even wouldn't go that
They are,
far.
well, the vast
Public
majority.
money should be spent carefully and
I-
thoughtfully.
Amen. So I completely agree. So at any rate, so I don't have much more in the way of formal presentation, and I'm happy to take any other questions the committee has. And just
I think the committee was, just kind of looking to see, even though we knew just, how it laid out and, how you folks planned and budgeted and all of that, and, I think it's very helpful.
Yeah, there's actually one other thing, which the next time y'all do this, I think it would be helpful, there are places in here that where you do, like the water, the 2 water,
the clay
funds.
Yeah.
come from the federal government, right?
All our funding here is the state.
Is the state match?
It's
Okay.
state funding, some of it used for match and some of it, but it's
So-
the state dollars.
So none of this is from
I
other,
refer to Nick's
This is-
expertise, but
Everything in this spreadsheet, historically, I'll just jump back 2 years just for clarity, would have been bonded dollar appropriations.
Okay.
State expenditures reimbursement.
okay,
The only thing that now has been introduced is the cash fund. And yes, to your point, Senator Harrison, I mean, there are funding streams that help support functions within the things that are funded by capital dollars
Yeah.
that do not show up in the capital, like the Clean Water
Yeah,
Fund.
which actually more than just supports it is the primary.
Right.
I mean,
Capital
our
is
match
small
is
piece.
much smaller than the rest.
Right.
Okay. All right, good. Good, yes, thank you.
And if you have, as always, any other questions on specific items or anything, have to follow up.
And I'll sit down with you and we can figure out a 10-year budget plan for me. Like, what car am I gonna buy in 10 years?
See,
You know,
households are
how
a
much
little
that payment's
different.
gonna
No,
be.
they, but
Actually-
they shouldn't be any different.
shouldn't
So
be.
let's
It
talk-
shouldn't be
you wanna
any
talk about
different.
pensions?
It shouldn't be any different.
Yeah.
It should be the
We're
same.
using people's
Well-
money.
Right, no, exactly. So that's why you diversify your revenue so that people, because the difference between a household and a government is that household is one group paying for it, but the government, you have different people paying at different times. So that's the other part of fairness that we need to look at. And that's why capital funding just makes sense. It makes more sense. And why borrowing honestly makes more sense
Sometimes.
than it does for a household. It's
Maybe,
just a different
but I'm not-
conversation.
Not always.
I think it's the same
No, right,
conversation.
no, but it's different when you have different people paying, because when you do cash all the time. And I'm not talking about our cash fund, but when you just pay for things that last 30 years and you buy it in 5 years, people who get to use it for the 25 to 30 year life, they're not paying for that capital. So that's not fair. So the way that you make that more fair is by,
Oh, you're complicated. It's all money. It's
No.
all money. It takes this much money to do this, it takes this much money to
Alright,
do that.
well,
What's the most least
we'll talk.
expensive way to do it?
No, it's a big,
No, I mean, I think what you're bringing up, Senator, is broadly referred to as intergenerational equity.
sure,
And something that actually the Seed Act has talked about a lot. It is something that, they're primarily focused on what is affordable and what we can handle as a state. But that is, I would say, traditionally the argument of folks in favor of public sector borrowing, right? If you have
Yes.
long-term cap, and that's the reason actually that borrowing and general obligation debt is typically geared towards capital projects because they have a
Yes.
long-term
Exactly.
asset. Like, I would just interject as a relatively young member of the species. I have heard some really compelling, in that same context, nuanced points made about, if you look at everything that's coming down the pike for the next generations,
Yeah.
both for good and for bad.
Yeah.
There's plenty of deferred costs.
oh yeah,
And I think that aligns with a lot of very public legislative priorities here to say that, maybe cutting future generations a little bit of a break on,
Yeah.
say, capital bonding interest might not be a terrible idea,
yeah,
given everything else that we're also handing on to them.
good point.
So I think it's a nuance
Yeah.
that has to be considered.
Yeah, but I would say that perhaps that neglect is a function of not taking care of it initially, right?
Yeah, but this.
So- Pennywise pound foolish.
Thank you.
I think I'll get a convertible.
Appreciate you guys coming in very much.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, always great to have you. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
Thanks.
Committee, anything else, just to talk about the fish hatchery bill. As, the rules committee has passed it along, so that will now go to the floor where tomorrow, maybe tomorrow it might get referred. Maybe tomorrow it might get referred to the, yeah, that's good, that's good. It might be referred to the appropriations, and then it shouldn't be very long in there. And then it will get to the point where we'll get a chance to report it, and then we'll get it sent over to Alice Emmons. I didn't get a chance to talk with Alice Emmons much today about that, but we talked about a lot about where they are with the bill. They're working on some markup. They've got a scattering of other bills that they're trying to get out. that aren't related to us because it's policy stuff. I would say again that we're probably 2 weeks away from having that bill. They are, working on some language changes, working on some other stuff. I think it's probably a foregone conclusion that that sub-account A is gonna look a lot different when it's all said and done on each side. Nobody knows where that's gonna be before it's done. We won't know that. We are gonna have a lot of work to do, I think, once that bill gets here. We're gonna have a lot of work to do. Still, it's not gonna come signed, sealed, delivered. Everybody wants to make it sound like, oh yeah, well, it's different, this and that. There's gonna be a lot of moving parts. I think we're, I'm not at all intimidated about what we're gonna be able to do and not do. I think, we have very smart committees. You've heard me say it on numerous times. But I think there's gonna be a lot of moving parts. We're gonna be doing a lot of conversations. We're gonna have to really understand why they did this, why they did that, and specifically that because they did that, doesn't mean it's bad, doesn't mean it's good, I think one of the mistakes that I made, early on in my first year, was, probably not appreciating how much the house did on a bill or on something. But again, that's all they have for a long period of time. So it's not like they, just go and willy-nilly, do this or do that. But with that being said, we're still gonna have, and one of the things that they didn't understand either, having a new chair in institutions is from the old chair was that, you know what? We put thought and effort into it too, and there's things that we're gonna want, and that's not gonna align with them. So that's kind of my, whole thought process that, just because they send it over doesn't mean that we're not going to be able to change it in the will of the way of where it's at. I think it's getting back to traditional capital budgets now that we're kind of out of some cash where we only have what we have. It's a lot of it's gonna be plug and play. There's still gonna be that cash component in there that gets moved around. I think we're gonna probably have some discussions more with the administration, about, why they want it this way and why the House wants it that way. So anyways, it's gonna be probably a little bit more complex than it was last year. Because money's tight and, we're running out of monies and all of that, so. But I think they're moving along well. There doesn't seem to be a lot of disagreement with a lot of different stuff in there. Yeah, I think that, we gotta be really, really mindful about going down rabbit paths of, doing stuff that at the end of the day just isn't gonna make a difference because we don't have the money. One of them might be at the end of the day, we're putting a lot of time into the state house expansion. We have to be really realistic about if we get to the end of this and we put all this work into it, I'm sorry, but we don't have $20 million. We just don't have that. We have to be very realistic as we're looking out, as Senator Harrison has the discussion that we just had. We gotta be really realistic about, we don't have that cash fund component like we had before. We don't have the $93 million that we had when we first started this whole process. So, we have to be realistic in our strategic thinking about what we're gonna buy future legislations too, because the fallacy is that, oh, you're not allowed to bind future legislators to, well, you do. That's that you do. You do bind that by setting out realistic goals. So I think it was a good segue to have that today. And I think we're gonna get a chance to see it real world coming right up real soon. So other than that, I don't know if any of that makes sense. I kind of rambled on a little bit, but we're gonna start to see that, and then what we'll do, which we didn't do, we did last year, we didn't do this year. First of all, what we did, I think, really, really well, and I know I struggle with it. I told you guys this before. This bill was just so much different than anything I've ever seen before. I think what we did beginning on is that we had to break this thing down so we could understand it. I think we've done that. Moving forward again, I think what we'll do is we will start to assign sections of it as we go. So as we start to see these things, and again, I'm ahead of myself a little bit, but we will start to assign sections again that you're familiar with. that we can go and report. I just think we're gonna see a little bit more complexity of things, than what we saw last year. And you see that when things start to get tight, you start to see that a little bit, so, but yeah, so. I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're gonna start to, once we get that bill, we're gonna have to really start to focus on that we understand what the bill's doing, why the money's doing it, why it got changed, why it got moved around. I'm gonna try to stay away from what we did last year. I don't know that a lot of that's gonna really have much to play. That's already been voted on, it's already been voted out. We'll try to we'll try to keep it to what we present as far as what we did this year, not what we did last year. So,